Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figure It Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and welcome to Rare Variants, the series in which we talk about a bunch of our favorite video game consoles throughout history, but focus on one oddball version of them that came out in one country for one reason or another, and they all have a story, and man, does this one have a story. So if you like this idea, the idea of taking these strange versions of video game systems and talking about them and giving their story, I've got a whole playlist of this. It includes things like prototypes like the Sega Pluto, the Nintendo PlayStation, but also just other odd systems that have a story that just not a lot of people have ever really heard. And man, do we have a doozy today. What you are seeing here, behold, the Joysound Festa, also known as a really, really strange version of the Nintendo Wii U. And we're going to talk all about it. Now, before we do that, though, if you guys could do me a favor, please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, as well as check out all my social media stuff in the description. I've got Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, Spreadshirt, Travel Channel. I appreciate the support on those, especially Patreon. Thank you so much. You guys are awesome. Now, oh yes, it is time. It is time to talk about the Joysound Festa. So here's the deal. You have to understand that this is an obscure machine. From what I can tell, there's only 3 people in the United States that have one. I'm now one of them. And it is a hard machine to get a whole lot of information on because its initial release was very much an under-the-radar move. It only came out in Japan. And even then, the sources on it are just kind of like brief. So here's what I have compiled together that I'm pretty sure was the timeline of events, but I fully admit it's a possibility there's certain things in here that are not correct. There's some assumptions because that's the problem with obscure consoles. There's not a whole lot of information on them. But here's what I've figured out so far. Now, obviously, if you know anything about Japan, you probably know that karaoke is a big deal over there. Like, that's not just a stereotype. Japanese love their karaoke. Karaoke, of course, being the concept where you play music, but there's no lyrics, and you just have a microphone, and you yourself are the singer to the song. They love that. That is absolutely true. And so as far back as 1992, from what I can tell, there was a company called, I want to say Xing, X-I-N-G. I'm just assuming it's pronunciation there. But this company called Xing, for our purposes anyway, decided all the way back then that it would be really great to have karaoke machines integrated into video game consoles, especially because, 1992, that was, the Super Famicom and Sega Mega Drive, well, more so the Super Famicom in Japan, was doing a lot better. We know, of course, it's the Super Nintendo and Genesis. But wouldn't it be nice to get that karaoke integrated into that? Because karaoke machines, as I said, stupid popular in Japan, they're also ludicrously expensive. So it is not a strange concept for basically companies like Xing and others to be like, you know what, there's already these video game systems, what if we program like a specific thing and just use their hardware so we don't have to effectively buy a whole bunch of additional hardware to make our product? It makes the product cheaper and then more likely customers buy it, etc., etc. So a lot of strange video game consoles have actually been born of that concept. But yes, as far as I can tell, 92, that's where they got the idea. Now, the technology certainly really wasn't there yet, and there would be a few attempts over time. Obviously, the Dreamcast had a karaoke add-on and so on and so forth. Sometime after 1992, there was this concept known as Joysound Karaoke, or Karaoke Joysound. Basically, like a digital service of karaoke that you could integrate into other machines. And this kind of came around in the early aughts, the 2000s, if you will. And it didn't necessarily immediately take off just because the technology, once again, wasn't quite there. However, that changed in 2008 because what happened is the Nintendo Wii was out there. It was a big success, even though I don't particularly like that video game system. It's impossible to deny its success. And Hudson Soft, the guys who made the PC Engine, decided to make a Joysound karaoke game for the Nintendo Wii in Japan. And it did pretty well. It got a release eventually in Europe, and then it got a digital re-release in, I want to say it was in North America, but I'm not 100% on that. The big focus here, obviously, is Japan. So the game does well enough, and when Nintendo lines up for the Wii U in 2012, when they released the system, they were like, all right, it's really important that karaoke be part of the Japanese market. That's how you got this. Now, this game you're seeing here for the Wii U and this bigger box, this is actually has nothing to do with the Festa itself. This is a specific piece of software they developed as just a game. And it came out in 2012. I don't know if it was a launch title specifically, but it was at least launch window because the game came out the same year as the system, and the system came out in November of 2012. Therefore, there wasn't a whole lot of time for this to come out. So yeah. Now, what eventually happens is a few months later, it seems like what happened was Xing came together with Joysound and Nintendo and said, let's make a machine together. Now, there's a bunch of rumors on the internet about how this machine was basically made out of recycled Wii U's that Nintendo couldn't sell. That is demonstrably not true. And the reason I know that's not true is because these were produced, they started making these in 2013, in the spring of 2013. The Wii U was still brand new at that point. Now, the Wii U admittedly wasn't a huge success initially, and unfortunately never would end up being one, but it wasn't just unsold Wii U's they couldn't get rid of. They actually did intentionally design these things. Now, what's bizarre about it is you can see this gigantic frame and all that. Really, it's just a nice shape to house the Wii U itself, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but what a beast. So here's what happens on the release of this machine itself. In 2013, supposedly they started making these, and well, they did start making them, obviously, but like the number of them I've seen is kind of varied. I've seen some numbers as low as 500 units produced. I've seen some as high as 5,000 produced, and the kind of median number I keep seeing is 1,000. My point is, I don't know which is accurate, if any are accurate, but it's not a big production number. And even more surprisingly, it actually was a success. You may not seem like it with such a low production number, but believe it or not, these things were produced all the way until 2018. And mine in particular, I've taken it apart. The Wii U inside was made in 2015, and the hard drive in it was made in 2016. So this thing was made at least in 2016, if not after that. So this actually isn't even one of the launch versions of the system. So when they released this, you gotta understand, this thing was not intended for you, the regular Joe customer, to buy as a video game console. This was intended for very specific markets as a karaoke device first and pretty much only. It wasn't really meant to do anything else. Karaoke machines, as I said, in Japan are stupid popular, but they're also crazy stupid expensive. And it's kind of a social expectation that they would appear in various places, sometimes restaurants, hotels, bars, obviously arcades, parlors, smoking parlors, if you will, even retirement homes. And the reason I bring that one up is, believe it or not, that's where the Joysound Festa was intended for. Here's a photo of your grandmother, if your grandmother's Japanese, playing the Joysound Festa in a retirement home. I can't believe it, but that's actually what the intended market was mostly for this thing, was retirement homes. Then, to a lesser extent, hotel lobbies and so on and so forth. And I don't know this, but I'm pretty sure the reason they selected the elderly as their target demographic was because of the Wii, at the time, still being so associated with old people that just had a great time with it. Yeah, this thing was in every way born of in the crucible of the sins of the Wii in that regard from a marketing perspective. But hey, to their credit, it did technically work, so I guess I can't knock them too much. Now, when it first came out, you had a couple of options. You could get just the box, which you see in front of you, which is this machine, plus a couple of extras, believe it or not, all of these actually shipped with 2 game pads. And the reason for that is they kind of figured these things were going to be so used so frequently, and if they were dropped or damaged, they didn't want people to not have the ability to use anymore, at least not very quickly, so they always came with a backup game pad that you could pop in and replace. Mine only came with the one, so that's why mine's probably in good shape, because we think that whoever owned this previously had probably used the other one the entire time and then swapped it right before they sold it, but I don't totally know. You will know it's the Joysound specific one because it does say Joysound on it, which is kind of unique, but that's really just a sticker, to tell you the truth. But yes, here's the part that will boggle your mind, though. The price of these things. There was the base unit, and then there was the complete unit, which I guess you can think of as really just the only difference between the two was that the complete unit came with a little kiosk type of stand that the thing would physically stand on. It wasn't like inside of it. It was just like almost like a cart that you would put it on. And then on top of that, it had a monitor that was dedicated to being with the machine. And that version cost 1,580,000 yen in 2013. Now, for those who don't know the conversion, that is roughly, and somewhat adjusted for inflation of the time, etc., as well as the currency exchange of the time, that's about $16,000 US. Yes. Or you could get the machine itself, just this part, for about, I think it was 1,280,000 yen, which is about $13,000. So Yeah, expensive. Very expensive, especially when you think of it as just a Wii U. But again, that wasn't the point. It wasn't meant to be just a Wii U. It was meant to be a dedicated karaoke device, and that had value because that was substantially cheaper than other dedicated karaoke devices. And like I said, it actually sold. These things actually, well, I should say sold in quotations, because here's the other key to this thing. You couldn't buy it. You had to be some sort of registered service like a nursing home. You would, quote unquote, buy it. And then on top of that, you had to actually pay a monthly fee to keep it because it had constant updates. Now, believe it or not, this thing actually does have internet access. There is a broadband port on the back, which we'll talk a little bit about later, that would allow you to connect it online. You registered the system essentially online with Xing, and they would give you updates specifically for this game with new songs and new content, but you essentially were paying a subscription fee to do that. And that was about $300 a month. Now, what's crazy, despite how expensive that all sounds, is at the end of it all, it wasn't even yours to keep. All that money you spent was just to lease it. You were expected to return it. About 5,000 of these, best case scenario, were produced. The vast majority of which were eventually returned due to the expiration of their lease. The only ones that are actually in private hands, such as myself, Orky Borky of Freedom, etc., were ones where when the lease expired, for whatever reason, whoever had it didn't return it, or it was possibly taken. I doubt it was taken. The Japanese don't really steal stuff. But more likely, somebody just never came a-knocking for it. And I would think that the ones that made it out are the ones that were people just held onto it the longest. So the thing with that, though, is that the system lasted longer than you'd expect. It was officially discontinued in 2018, and it's very unique, and the reason it was discontinued actually had nothing to do with the machine itself. The machine was successful. People bought it, more accurately leased it, they paid the subscription service regularly, it did just fine at what it was supposed to be doing, and technologically speaking, it was doing a great job. It was able to be updated. In fact, as a bonus, when I first fired this thing up and I connected to the internet, it told me that the last firmware update to the game data was in 2022. Only 2 years ago at the time I make this video, it got its last update. That means somebody was still paying for the subscription service up to that point. No, the reason they stopped manufacturing this and the reason they eventually stopped supporting it entirely was not the machine itself. It was because Nintendo had released the Switch in 2017 and they effectively dropped support of the Wii U like a dirty shirt. So Joysound and Xing couldn't really continue to support the machine because Nintendo wouldn't go along with it. That's what ultimately killed this machine, which I find just fascinating. Like, I really do. So that, in a nutshell, is the basic history of it. And like I said, there's very few of these things in private hands because they're not supposed to have been in private hands. So, yay, I got one. That's cool. And for the record, if you're like, please tell me you didn't, like, trade away a car in order to pay for this thing. No. How I got this, actually, was Orky Borky of Freedom, who I mentioned before. And if you want to talk to that guy, like, that guy has some, you think I got some obscure stuff? That guy has some obscure stuff. He is a member of my Discord, and, you know, he told us all about it. And he's like, I can get you one if you want it. I was like, all right, how much? He's like, it's $100 for the machine and $80 shipping. So $180, it's yours. And I was like, son, sold. That's worth it alone. Like, I want to share that story with you guys, especially because I love the Wii U. I have a complete set for it. I've even done a video on every game ever released for it. I think it was a fun, very underrated, very misunderstood video game system. And to have this really obscure version of the system is fascinating to me. Now, let's talk about it from a few other perspectives here, right? Let's talk about the hardware itself now that we've kind of got the history element out of the way. Now, the hardware is fascinating because it's really just a big box that was meant to kind of not make the system seem like a video game system. And it's just a place to kind of hold the gamepad. Now, you'll notice on the front it obviously has a whole bunch of karaoke-like options. There's 3 ports on the front for microphones. There's a few different switches that do different things. There's dials and so on and so forth. I'm not going to lie, I'm not super familiar with karaoke, and I cannot read Japanese, so I'm a little limited on what some of that stuff does. I know some of them simply turn off the microphone, some of them adjust the volume within it, as well as the volume of the music that when you eventually play a karaoke game, etc. That's mostly what that stuff does. On the back, there's a whole bunch of stuff. There's additional power supplies, which I assume have to do with the monitor rig that it came with, but I don't know because I don't have access to it. There's also various audio output options, which makes sense. There's also, confusingly, 3 HDMI output options. But what I've noticed is 2 of them don't seem to do anything, at least on a standard setup. The one labeled HDMI 1 is the video output, and HDMI 2 doesn't appear to do anything. Again, I don't have the original case, tower, and monitor that it came with, so I don't know if they integrated in some other way. There's also an RCA audio slot on the right, which turns out to be more significant than you would think. Now, while the Wii U itself will get audio out of the HDMI port, once it goes into the game, that's where the audio basically stops. You actually have to use the RCA ports. I don't know entirely why they did this, other than, again, it was intended for a specific type of monitor and maybe a specific type of setup, and it wasn't meant to be a video game console. Maybe it had something to do with the way they were intending to, you know, hook it up into parlors and retirement homes with separate speakers. I honestly don't know. But my point is, if you actually do end up with one of these things and you want to get audio out of it, you're going to have, in my case, I have a RCA to 3.5 millimeter audio adapter, and then from there you'd have to plug it into either headphones or however you want to integrate it. It's just kind of stupid, but it is what it is. Now, let's talk about it under the hood before we boot this thing up. And oh, we're going to turn it on, don't you worry. So I'm going to have to operate off of my memory here because the system is all hooked up, but I will take it apart to show you guys some B-roll here. But basically, when you take it apart, there's actually only 6 screws holding this thing together. And if you want to remove it, you take the gamepad out, which the gamepad just willy-nilly comes out, no problem, as you can see right there. It's just a standard gamepad that just happens to say Joysound on it. And then it's just got a standard like Wii U charging dock, you know, connected to it. It also comes with, while the Wii U gamepad has the little, well, I can't remember the name of it, the little pen thing. You guys know what I'm talking about. While it has that, they actually have their own special one that's built into the system that you can use, because as strange as this sounds, the video output option on this thing is mostly useless. You don't actually really need to look at the screen that much unless you're actually doing the karaoke element of it. All the like interactivity happens on the screen of the gamepad, which is truly unfortunate because when I want to show you guys footage of it, you're going to have to just bear with me where we directly film the gamepad, but we'll get back to that later. But yeah, so you take that off and then you remove the casing by removing the 6 screws. 2 on the right side, 2 on the left side, and then 2 on the back. And then you just kind of flex the metal a little bit and then the thing just pops right off. And underneath what you can see, like I said, you can see the gamepad charger, just kind of a standard one. They more or less, I'm not going to say glued into it, but that's how it feels, is just sitting there on the top. And that's where you just sit the gamepad. On the bottom left, you'll notice that's the Wii U. It's just sitting there. It's just an 8 gigabyte white standard Japanese Wii U. And I know it's Japanese, obviously, because it's built in there. I also know it's the 8 gigabyte version. There are, I didn't know this till recently, there are actually 32 gigabyte white models. This is not one of them. On top of it, you'll also notice a hard drive. That is a 2 terabyte hard drive that is sitting on top of this thing. And believe it or not, they actually did need that. The Wii U's maximum storage capacity externally was 2 terabytes, and trust me when I say they basically took full advantage of it. On the right, you'll notice there's basically just some framing, essentially. I think this has something to do with wireless controllers, optional wireless controllers or wireless optional mics, but I'm not totally sure about that. And in the back, and you'll find this kind of amusing, this is where I want to talk about the broadband port. On the back of the system, there is a broadband port, as mentioned before. But really what it is it's just an extension cable that feeds up into the back of the system. And then from there, you'll see that it's just plugged in to a Wii Ethernet to USB adapter. And I say Wii specifically. That is not a Wii U brand one. It is a Wii brand Ethernet adapter, which I just thought was adorable. And yeah, so that's kind of it as far as like what's right there. It's just a bunch of stuff kind of essentially jerry-rigged together to make the Wii U do something it wasn't really intended to do. You'll also notice these kind of obnoxious USB 2 cables sticking out the front of the Wii U that prevent you from getting to the disc slot, but we'll get back to that later. Yeah, so that's kind of the guts of the system there. In the front, by the panels, the karaoke panels, which is all kind of rigged together through, I think it's through another USB port that fires up in there. There's also, I should have mentioned, there's also the way the system gets power. There's essentially like a little mini power strip in there, and all the things that need it are all kind of plugged right into there, including a very, again, British idiom here, bog standard Wii U power supply that's plugged into that as well, because they all just fires up at once. So when you turn the system on, or turn the machine on rather, what you're kind of doing is firing up a whole bunch of stuff all at once, which is kind of cool. including this gigantic fan on the back, which when we turn it on, you'll notice. But anyway, so it's just a Wii U with a whole bunch of stuff attached to it, which is, I think, bizarre, but really cool. But the front part, like I said, there's this big plastic button here. Like you can see me right there pushing. Well, I'm not going to push it just yet, but this power button, as well as the reset button there, on the machine, they might look somewhat sophisticated, like, ooh, big power button, right on. What they actually are is just a plastic little stick that just goes and presses the power button or the sync button on the Wii U itself. That's all it is. It's just a way to access the system in case the gamepad gets detached or whatever. You don't want to have to take the system apart to try and resync up the gamepad. That's why they put the sync slot there, and of course the power button just makes sense. To be fair though, you can turn it on by just turning on the gamepad. You don't actually have to use that big button, much like an actual Wii U, which I think is interesting. So let's talk about the disk drive, because I'm sure people have questions about that. Now, as I mentioned, it is ultimately just a Japanese Wii U. What they did is they did a slight modification to the system, very slight. So when you boot it up, you might remember if you had a Wii U or have a Wii U, at the very beginning of the Wii U's lifespan, when you turned the system on, it took kind of an eternity to boot up to the dashboard and allow you to do anything. So if you wanted to actually play a game, like let's say you were in the middle of playing something and you had stopped for the day and now you came back and you wanted to go back to the game you were playing, you'd have to boot up the system and wait like a minute or so. Then you'd have to wait for it to figure out which game it is. Then you'd have to load up the game separately. And basically, there was a lot of people complaining about how long it actually took to get into a game. So Nintendo at some point did a firmware update that allowed you, if you remember, to turn on the gamepad. It would give you like a whole bunch of options on the gamepad, what I think they called like quick boot mode or whatever. And you could tell it what to launch automatically, so it would kind of skip a couple of the steps, thus getting you into the gameplay faster. They've effectively done that to the nth degree by making it so when you turn the system on, it automatically always just boots into basically the, I'm not going to say the hard drive version of this game, but you know, the installed version of this game, and then some on the system. And you never even have the option to go to the Wii U dashboard. In fact, if you didn't know this was a Wii U just by looking at the gamepad, there's really nothing that would even tell you it was the Wii U, except for a very brief moment when you turn the system on and it says Wii U on the tablet. But if you're an elderly Japanese person, you may not know why that matters. I think that was the whole point. You just wanted to fire it up and just get into the game, which is fine. Now, what's interesting about it is that once you're in there, I don't know all the differences between the disc-based version of this game and the, I'm going to call it the Joysound Festa version of the game, the version that's built into the software. I don't know all the differences between the two, but what I do know is that the hard drive in there, which is again 2 terabyte hard drive, contains a metric ton of let's call it DLC for this game. In fact, it has like 99 files, and the only reason I know it's 99 is when you actually look at the files, it actually straight up just says it's like 1 through 99. I don't know if that was a happy accident, if they intended to make 99, or what exactly the programming reason for that was, but either way, there's 99 DLC files, which is something. When I first booted it up, it tried to connect to the internet, which I wasn't connected to, and I was trying to figure out how to get to the Wii U dashboard. Turns out you actually can do that. When you turn on the system, when it gets past everything, you'll be presented with this like screen of these characters. If you press this big blue button and you click all the way to the right, you'll see this other little blue button, and that'll present you with like a keypad. If you press 0, 0, 0, 0, like 4 zeros, and then launch that, it'll have a separate little menu, and the top option there, press that, and that will bring you into the Wii U's menu, the standard one that you're familiar with. Now, from in there, that's where you can see all these like 99 files, and you can see the game that's built in. It'll look a lot more familiar to you. This is obviously where the brain of the system is, and this is the only way to get to the Wii U dashboard, provided the hard drive and all that is still connected. And so from there, I wanted to see what we could tinker with. Now, not surprisingly, I don't know if it was Nintendo themselves, or if it was the previous owners, or if it was Shing when they were releasing this. Somebody put parental controls on the system. Basically that 4-digit code that kind of prevents you from doing a lot of stuff on the system. So that was a little irritating, because if you want to do much of anything, you couldn't. So fortunately, we now live in an era where there's actually a website where you can actually plug in some information and it'll straight up tell you that the code you need to unlock the system. Totally worked, and I did it. So I was able to do that. And then once that was done, I was able to make, tinker with a couple of changes. Annoyingly, one of them you can't change is language settings. The whole thing is in Japanese. For whatever reason, Nintendo did not put English options or language options into the Wii U. It was just built into whatever version of, I think, the BIOS they gave you. So the only way to change the language settings would be to like do a proper hack to the system. But the reason I don't want to do that is it would eliminate the one thing that makes it special, which is effectively, as strange as this sounds, you have to think of this machine, even though it is just a karaoke device ultimately, you have to think of it as the most unique Wii U game release. Because not only does it have one very particular game on it, it's got a whole bunch of exclusive DLC that only exists. Like, it's the definitive edition of Nintendo Joysound Wii U edition is this box. And if you were to basically hack the system, you probably would lose all that content and what made it function, therefore killing the game, therefore killing the point. So we don't do that. And there's also really no reason, because I'm not going to try and play games on it. But if you're wondering, yes, the disk drive does work because it is just a standard Wii U ultimately. If you really wanted to do that, when you have the system apart, you would disconnect the hard drive cables, turn the system on and put a disk into it, then turn the system back off almost immediately, put the hard drive back in, boot it up as normal, get back, go through that sequence of events I was just talking about, get all the way back to the dashboard, and there your disk would be. Keep in mind, though, the Wii U is region locked, so the only games that will work natively are Japanese games. However, and I did do this, there are now software exploits where you can kind of temporarily hack the system, but basically as soon as you turn the system off, it goes back to being stock. It's a software called DNSpresso. It's just something you put onto an SD card. So I put that into the system, and I launched it, and I did the whole process. Once you do that, I was able to do a couple of things just so people are curious. You basically do a DNS exploit that more or less tricks the system into running the homebrew stuff. And then from there, you can use Wii U ident, which I did, which allowed me to determine that I believe it was the manufacturing date of that particular Wii U was 2015, and which type of NAND chip was on there. It's I believe the Toshiba ones, the ones that are not, prone to disaster, like the 32 gigabyte ones. The 8 gigabyte ones are fine. I was able to also do the important thing that I know what people would want. I used NAND dumper. That way all the contents on the brain of the Wii U, in this case a rather unique one, was dumped onto an SD card. It is safe. It is fine. Orky Borky of Freedom and I are still working on the hard drive side of things, on how to dump those. We're on it. We understand the problem. We're working on it. But I was able to do that. And then once you're running DNSpresso, you can it also makes the disk drive region free, at least temporarily. So I verified that it does in fact work with the European games. It also works with the American games. In fact, even better, if it's connected to the internet at that point, it'll even download the firmware updates for those games, which there was no reason to do. But all the same, it did work. Point is, the Wii U side of it was totally fine. But running a disk on this thing is just a massive pain, and there's no reason to do it. So don't bother. So with all that said, let us talk about the actual karaoke machine. It is time, everybody. Let's fire this up. So we're going to turn on the gamepad, which will turn on this machine, and you're going to hear, if you hear this, there's a big fan back there. So it'll boot into the Wii U tablet section, gamepad section. You'll see that. And then from there, I'll actually just leave it like that for a little bit. It'll just start loading this game automatically. Actually, I'm going to have to hold this just so I can explain what I'm seeing. But yeah, it'll sync there. You'll also see on this screen I have on the side, it'll show you some stuff, but not everything that's on the gamepad. You got to remember the Wii U, the TV screen and the gamepad screen weren't always synced together. So it starts automatically booting into this game, Joysound Festa. Right now it's basically looking for firmware updates, and then it's going to try to see, it's trying to connect to the internet. It's loading everything, and then it realizes there's no internet connection, so it's like, hey, there's nothing else to do. For the record, again, last time I did connect it to the internet before, and it basically said, okay, your system was last updated in 2022. There's nothing additional. That's the end of it. Because I don't know, the subscription service is long since not functional. So it just says, like, yeah, I can't do anything else. Here's where it just kind of, I can't read all this, but something about like 32,000 this. There's a bunch of like 190,000 that. I don't know if it's about video files or what, which we'll get back to. And so then the game just auto kind of boot loads. So yeah, on this screen, you're just going to see some standard imagery. Now, what's weird about it is everything you have to do is pretty much through the gamepad, because everything that shows up on the screen here is just like a cycling of random images. Like, this is a bunch of Japanese just stock photos. This screen will only matter when you're actually doing the karaoke stuff, which we'll get back to in a bit. So again, I can't speak Japanese or read Japanese, so my options are a tad limited, but here's some of the stuff I know. You can actually go into this menu, and within here, I don't remember the sequence offhand, so I'll have to show it in B-roll. There are actually some mini games built into this thing. And in order to get to them, you have to go through a specific process. But once you go through said process, most people, including myself, the mini game that they'll have is a game called, it's basically Whack-A-Mole, which is just, if you ever went to like a Chuck E. Cheese or something, you just took like a little stick and you hit those little whack-a-mole things. Like, that's what the game is. In talking to Orky Borky of Freedom, who's the only other person I know directly who has one of these, he seems to believe that mine is a slightly more updated version than his because it seems to have more mini games on it. That's cool. It's not really why you play this thing, but hey, cool. There's some mini games on there if you're really interested. I don't actually know if those mini games exist in the disc-based version or if that's exclusive to this machine, but either way, they are there. As I mentioned before, there's, you can get into the dashboard relatively easily by just doing a different thing, but obviously what everybody's here for is the music itself. Now, there's a few different ways to do this, and I'm going to show you one particular way, mostly focusing on English songs. I don't remember the sequence, again, offhand, but I will show you here in the B-roll specifically what you have to do. And once you have that sequence happening, you just go through these options. You have to dig around a little bit, and then you get to a certain point where you'll basically have an entire list of English songs. Now, the English songs element of it, it looks to be about 7,000 songs. And it was when I saw this that it kind of dawned on me why this thing is so expensive. See, the Wii U is not the expensive part. This hunk of metal and plastic around it is not the expensive part. The hard drive in there is not the expensive part. The licensing is the expensive part. They had to legitimately pay for all of this music to be in there and to be regularly used. The thing with Japan is they're very up and up when it comes to copyright laws and things like that. They weren't going to just start making machines that pirated music, especially with Nintendo's name on it. There was no way. That is what you were paying for when you bought this machine, was all of the ridiculous music license stuff. That's what makes this insane. That's what makes a large part of what I think makes karaoke machines general insanely expensive. So I'm looking through this, and I noticed that they have a lot of music that even I, who don't know much about music, even I was familiar with. There's tons of stuff in there. So for example, they have Michael Jackson stuff in this thing. And when I pulled that up, I noticed there was two different versions of, say, Thriller. And this is kind of interesting. They have the version that you would expect to see in karaoke where it doesn't have lyrics. If you're not super familiar with how karaoke is, it's basically just the background music to a song and the lyrics aren't there. And instead, the lyrics just appear on the screen and you, with your microphone, you're the one playing it, you're the one singing it, and you're supposed to be the singer. However, in some cases, again, like Thriller, they actually have the song with lyrics in there. So I went ahead and I played it and I was like, this sounds weird. Because it isn't actually Michael Jackson. It's like a weird cover of the song. And I thought, that's strange. Is that just because Michael Jackson is so prolific and so big? So I actually checked a few other songs. And granted, I don't know a whole lot about music. I admit this. But other songs where I knew the song, they always seem to be some weird cover. So it's like, even though they paid for licensing, they paid for like off-brand licensing. I don't know. I don't pretend to know why that was the case, but that seems to be the case. And I promise you'll hear some music in a second. It's just going to be through a little bit of a weird method here. The other thing that I found when I was digging through there, I was just randomly going through this nearly 7,000 English songs, as they call it, and I just happened to stop at just the right spot. They have Go-Go Power Rangers. The Power Rangers theme song is on this machine. Oh, I was so happy about that. So here's the thing with it, though. I would love, just absolutely love, to record this and just play it and let you guys see it. And I decided to do a little test. As I mentioned before, the HDMI output on this machine does not carry the music from the machine, so I had to use a separate audio cable. And lucky for me, because of the Bahar Bros, I did a video on it not too long ago. There's a device called the Prodigy, which is an HDMI capture box that also has 3.5mm input. I was able to actually capture the audio and the video correctly together thanks to them. And I was like, okay, sweet. I captured the song. This is awesome. I'll be able to use it in my video. I got a little paranoid, though, about YouTube's Content ID claim system. So just out of an abundance of caution, I ripped Thriller from this thing, and I ripped Go-Go Power Rangers, and I decided to upload them to my unlisted channel, which, by the way, I have an unlisted channel. There's not much content over there. It's mostly just for Patreon content, but if you want to go over there, that's up to you. I decided to upload them there and just see how YouTube would react. Both, even the Power Rangers one, immediately Content ID claimed. So what that means is I can't actually play them in this video for you. However, in the description of this video, I've put links to those two videos so you can just kind of see as well as hear what this sounds like. I can show the footage in this. I just can't listen to the audio, which is really unfortunate for such an obvious, you know, music machine, but it is what it is. What can I tell you? So anyway, yeah, I was just really, really happy at Go-Go Power Rangers. That just made me excitable. But yeah, so in a nutshell, I mean, granted this was a long video, but that's kind of what this is. You have to think of it, it is a video game console. It is the most obscure, most bizarre version of the Nintendo Wii U by far. At best, a handful of these will exist because not that many were made, and most of them weren't allowed to be retained. The only ones that were retained, I am guessing, purely guessing, were from people who had decided to pay the full amount, they had the full machine, they were paying for the license, and they just kept holding on to it until the subscription service itself died, and nobody from Nintendo or Joysound or Shing ever came looking for them. So, big machine, let's get it out of here. Hey, some stupid gaijin wants to pay $100 for it. Great, get it out of here. I don't even care. That is most likely what happened, but I don't even totally know that. So, whatever. It is fun, but you got to keep in mind, it's only if you're really into karaoke, which I am not. And by the way, that's another thing I should mention. So you saw, if you did go over and you saw some of this footage of like Power Rangers or whatever, you might think, oh, so like every song has a video that goes with it. No. There is tons and tons and tons and tons of Japanese video clips, and they're just randomly generated with the song. And it can make for some really strange combinations. Like, I think I was listening to Kenny Rogers, The Gambler, which is kind of a slow, like almost like country song. The only reason I even know of it because my mom liked that song. R.I.P. Mom. She liked that song, so I remember listening to it, and it just randomly generated a video of some like Japanese girl on a beach in like a bikini. And I'm like, this is not, these two things don't go together at all. So you can find some that are fun. Like a couple of times when I did Power Rangers, I actually randomly came across this video of like these 5 girls like dancing, and they were like dancing with multiple colors, and I was like, this almost works. So sometimes it's just funny for the laughs. But yeah, maybe someday at some video game convention, if anybody wants this thing, maybe I'll try to bring it. I don't know where I would take it other than a local one because this thing's a beast. I'm not flying with this. But maybe we rig it up at some con somewhere and have some fun with it. But beyond that, I don't know what else you ever really do about it. So hopefully you guys appreciated this, because this is a stupid thing to now have, because once the video's done, I can't imagine I'm going to be using it a whole lot. But that said, I am happy to preserve it. I wanted it. I think it's really neat. I do love the Wii U. And if I own the Divers 2000 Dreamcast, I have to own something stupid like the Joysound Festa. It's just kind of one of the rules. So anyway, there you go. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, if you could, please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, as well as check out all of my social media stuff in the description. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon. Really, again, appreciate that. Spreadshirt and my travel channel. And if you guys have any questions about it, I'll do my best to answer you. But again, I didn't grow up with this thing, you know, like I don't speak Japanese. I only relatively recently got it, and I am getting it through something of a filter from what I can kind of cobble together on the internet. That said, like I said, the NAND stuff is dumped. When we figure out the hard drive thing, we'll do that too, and that content will be out there, and maybe one day all the Joysound Festa content will be available for people to put onto a stock Wii U. I don't know, maybe, and then you can still not really play it because you probably don't speak Japanese. But anyway, it's a possibility. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all later.